What up, y'all? I'm Summer. Let's talk reptiles. So this is another why-based husbandry video. And in light of all the things that are happening right now with Slither Inc., I wanted to talk about why herperoculture. Now, shout out to my boy Roy. You're the best. I love you, man. And Phil with their Project Herperoculture podcast. Why am I singing so much this morning? I'm just happy, I guess. All right. So they asked that question at the end of their episodes. And I do think a lot about that question. And so I want to talk about in this episode of why-based husbandry, why-based reptile keeping. Let's talk about the whys behind doing this in the first place. Now, I think it's clear that there are a couple of different camps, a couple of different reasons that people may have for keeping reptiles. And what I see, I want to talk about two of the ones that I think are very conflicting. The first one is you keep reptiles because you have a genuine love for the natural world. It's interesting to you. You love these animals. You think they're really cool. There's something about them that just stirs something inside your soul, inside your spirit. I lost my plug. It must be in the bed somewhere. Okay. It stirs something in your soul and it just brings you genuine pleasure, genuine connection, genuine just relief, all kinds of different feelings that are all positive for you. Now, of course, there's stress in that for sure, right? Right now, I stayed in bed later than I should have stayed in bed. And I need to go around and do my full poop check. And then I need to go gather insects. And then I need to feed, I feel a little bit of stress in that. But there's also a whole lot of just enjoyment in that, right? So there's folks who do this because they genuinely love and enjoy these animals. And then I think there's this other category of people that I've been observing. And I don't think it's about the reptiles at all. I don't think their hobby is reptiles. I think their hobby is actually breeding. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be reptiles that they're working with. It could be anything. Breeding literally anything. And could potentially lead to this mindset of I need to have a million of these guys, because what I'm most interested in is replicating life in some way, shape, or form, as opposed to actual full heart-on interest in the enjoyment of the actual life itself. Does that make sense? I've just been thinking about this roughly. And so I don't know how fleshed out this is going to be. I'm still thinking about it, right? And what I see in a lot of those instances, just like looking at people that I follow, looking at people that pop up into my feed that I don't follow and will never follow. And yeah, it's really interesting. It's like you end up with a gabillion animals and you focus on like breeding them and reproducing them and selling them. And it's so much less about the actual beauty of the animals, how much you care about the animals, a connection to the actual animals and their life forces, trying to give those animals like an amazing life while they're with you. And I'm not saying that necessarily saying that like I think that this is what happens or is a part of what happens with like rat keepers versus like non-rat keepers, because I do agree that the argument about rats versus not rats is really nuanced. I don't think it's as simple as all rats are evil. I do think there are instances when rats can come in handy when you have sick animals, having to set them up in a hospital like setup, like things like that. Like I do think there's instances where rats can come in handy, but I do think that even if you're keeping your animals in racks, that those containers should be reasonably sized for the animal. And that there's certain species that should never ever be kept in racks, because how it would be extremely difficult to create a rack that is like appropriately sized for that animal, and that all the racks should have enrichment in there for those creatures. And so I've been thinking about this idea, this thought process of the difference between people who are keeping reptiles because they genuinely love the animals, and people who, and that is their hobby, the reptiles, the life, the natural world, learning about the natural world. That is their actual passion and hobby. And folks whose actual passion and hobby is the breeding of these animals, the breeding, that's their hobby. And like when I look through some of the people that I find to be like super inspiring with the way that they keep and raise their animals, as well as the way that they go through their breeding processes, the ways that they think about who is going to be able to take on these animals that they've reproduced. Like when I look at all of that, I can see a difference between folks who are like, I'm breeding these animals, I am here because I love the animals in and of themselves, and the care and effort that they put into making sure that when those animals go to new homes, that they're making sure those homes are ideal for the life and longevity, and not just the health, but also the thriving health of those animals. So it's just interesting to me. And like, I wonder how many folks have thought about where, like really evaluated what they're doing. Like, is your hobby the actual reptiles themselves? Or is your hobby just breeding the reptiles? You're into breeding them. You're into the community that comes along with breeding them, with other folks that are just all about breeding them. When it comes to your conversations about reptiles, it's all about breeding them, their genetics, what they can potentially produce, all of that stuff. Now, and I'm not saying that the two are mutually exclusive, right? For example, I've recently got into garter snakes, and I am so stoked about the possibilities of working with radix, with T radix. And I've been doing a lot of research into the different combinations and what those different combinations can produce. A part of it is because when it comes to what I do with the SHAP in general, one of my goals is to make sure that if I am going to be producing new animal life, that I take that so seriously, and that I make sure that the animal life that I am reproducing and bringing into this world, that I'm doing it in a way that is not going to be a part of the problem. What does that mean for me? So for me, that means that if I say I like got into breeding like leopard geckos or something, and I go and I do my due diligence. I research all my local shelters to see what type of leopard geckos most commonly end up in their shelters. I call those high shelter risk animals. And I see that it's just a whole buttload of just normal leopard geckos. Then in my mind, I'm going to do everything in my power to not produce the animals that are most likely going to end up in shelters, or could end up in shelters and be a part of the problem. I am surrounded by, this is Little Bit, and she is, in my opinion, the most beautiful cat in the world. We're not sure what she is. We adopted her from our vet, who pulled her off the streets, and as a kitten to like, that's a whole nother story, but she's very sweet and also very skittish. This is also one of our babies. So this is our Little Bit, Sophie. I know I'm off topic. I swear I'll get back. This is our little girl, Sophie. People are this she's very, very sweet. She has what's called spinal walking. It's a form of paralysis where her brain isn't connected to her back end. She can still stand and walk, but she has very little to no feeling or sensation in her back end. Hence the diaper. She has no idea when she's going to potty. And her back end kind of just works independently based on muscle memory. So she can walk and she can run, but her front end and her back end are never on the same page. All right, get out of here, baby. Okay, so I think about that a lot. I think it's a huge responsibility to decide that you want to bring new life into this world. And deciding for me that I'm going to do, in order for me to be a part of this healing process and growth process within the reptile community, and wanting to be a part of this on a holistic level, meaning from the level of great husbandry, from the level of what good breeding practices looks like. I can't do any of that work from the outside. I have to be a part of the communities in order to be able to have a voice within those communities that could even be moderately listened to or respected, right? And a part of what I set for myself with standards of breeding is that if I'm going to reproduce animals, then they need to not be a part of the problem. For instance, Uromastyx is my passion species, and there's some species of Uromastyx that are high shelter risks. Gerais are high shelter risks. They come in, most of the ones that you see at reptile shows are all wild caught and imported. They sell them at super low prices because of that. People have horrible experiences. I would love to work with the species of Gerais, but for me, in my eyes, it's a high shelter risk animal, and I don't want to be a part of that problem. Or worse, I start working with them, a lot of other people start working with them captive bred, which I do think should happen. And then they start selling at higher prices, and like with the hopes that that would curb the importation. But what really is likely going to happen is importers are just going to be like, oh, people are selling these guys for 300. I'm only selling them for 80. I'm going to start selling them for 300. It's a sad part of the conversation. So I think of this in a lot of ways, and it isn't mutually exclusive. I am very excited about breeding. I'm very excited that I have Ornata eggs in my incubator. I am mind-blowingly excited that I have Yemenensis eggs in my incubator. And then I am really stoked that I have 75% red monster eggs that are going to have all kinds of other cool things like hypo and trans and leatherback in my incubator. I'm really stoked about those things. And like a part and like that, and breeding is an aspect of my reptile hobby for me. But also, and more than that, so is researching their natural habitats, learning the best ways to set up an enclosure and environment for them, making sure that they're mentally stimulated, that they have all of this enrichment, making sure that I am giving all of them time, that I am leaning into the things that I can give them and should be giving them in this captive environment. Like I will sit, you could ask, I mean, I don't know when you would have an opportunity to, but you could ask my lovely partner, Stephanie, how much time I just sit either just looking at reptiles or reading about reptiles, watching videos and content about reptiles. I read white papers, I read scientific studies. Like I am so geeked out about reptiles as a whole, right? And so I urge you to ask yourself, like, for the folks that are watching this video, if you watched it all the way through to this point, I thank you so much. And I urge you to ask yourself, like, what is this about for you? Like, what are you thinking? Are you a reptile keeper? Are you a breeder? Is that your hobby? Is reptile keeping your hobby? Is it a mix of both? And what do you want it to be about for you? Yeah, I'm just putting this out there. I think that looking at things like what's happening with Slither Inc. and just the horrific content and videos. This isn't the first time we've seen this, right? Reptiles by Mac. There was horrible footage that came out from ex-employees for the things that were happening within that mass breeding facility, animals left to die, right? And I think when it comes to folks like Slither Inc. and folks like Reptiles like Mac, it has nothing to do about the love for animals. Their hobby is breeding and reproducing. Their hobby is money. And like, in order to, like, I think, my personal opinion, in order to do this in a way that actually shows we deserve to have this hobby. Frankly, I don't think humans deserve animals at all. We are trash. But to show that, like, we should be able or could handle the responsibility of keeping to be able to have access to this and doing this, that, like, it's important that we think about why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and always continuously thinking about how and why we can do this better. All right. I know this was a long ramble. I just wanted to say these thoughts. And if you watch it, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.